Hollow Knight Silksong has been one of the most anticipated releases since pretty much 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and of course, maybe if the developers keep it up, 2024 heading into 2025. Whenever the game ends up releasing, we know it's gonna be fantastic. So in this video, I want to try to showcase just 7 amazing Metroidvania games you could be playing as you continue to wait for multiple years whenever Silksong is ready to release. One of the biggest ongoing themes in Hollow Knight, and of course something that we can expect to see in Silksong, is sadness, and pretty much sadness is all around the world in Rain World. In this title, you're playing as a slug cat creature that simply is set to explore really phenomenal and distinct worlds that are extremely unique to one another, where there's plenty of terrifying and terrible enemies ready to pretty much get in your way as soon as you start your engagements. Essentially, you're constantly being chased by enemies, you're continually having to fend off for yourself, not necessarily just from the enemies themselves, but also the environment can be a danger all upon itself. Despair simply is put around every single corner, and sadness is pretty much something you're gonna find around the world in bunches. While the difficult can be a lot to handle depending on how much you're willing to put up with it, there will be plenty for you to be able to see, and at the end of the day, the struggle is certainly worth the amazing payoff, as the story is something that this game really does drive home. Now, Ellipse is not currently out yet, but it will be dropping onto the PlayStation Store and Steam later in 2023. This game's story revolves around the Abyss, an underground set caverns where pretty much no one has ever come out of once they get tossed in, and you just so happen to be the one being tossed in this time around. To say that this is a Metroidvania at heart is certainly an understatement. There's 2D platforming goodness pretty much everywhere you see it. Plenty of environmental traps for you to be able to overcome, plenty of dangers with kind of like quick-footed enemies who are willing to fight as fast and as aggressively as you do as well. As you travel through the Abyss, you'll be making use of plenty of brand new skills and upgradable abilities as you slash and dash and of course bash your way through plenty of enemies as you explore richly detailed environments oozing with plenty of atmosphere, and you'll be discovering plenty of things that the universe in this specific game has to offer. Now, the next game I'm going to mention is probably not going to come to much of a surprise to anyone, and is Dead Cells. Now, this one is more of a roguelike than a Metroidvania. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's all that much different than Hollow Knight. Pretty much is not only one of the best indie games ever created from quite a while, but it also has pretty punchy and in-depth kind of combat mechanics with plenty of brutal bosses and gorgeous pixel art visuals. And of course, you'll be happy to know that in the most recent wave of DLC, they started to include plenty of skins from like Metroidvania games and even Hollow Knight included. So there's going to be a lot there for Hollow Knight fans to be able to check out on this one. And in typical roguelike fashion, it simply means that each one of your lives is kind of like its very own run. Essentially, once you die, you reset and you start from scratch. The catch here is that there's gradual growth. You'll be collecting weapons, you'll be collecting items that will make your next and subsequent runs a little bit easier, and essentially makes the game more approachable the more and more you fail at it. This is something that Hollow Knight Songs fans will certainly be fully aware of, as they have experienced plenty of trials and tribulations, and certainly things that you need to overcome. Now, the next 2 games that I want to shout out are Axiom Verge and Axiom Verge 2. Now, they both separately have different visual styles. One of the biggest criticisms that were levied to the sequel were the fact that it looked extremely different than the first game, but the gameplay mechanic at its core felt very similar. And simply put, Axiom Verge, at the very least the first one, pretty much feels like a spiritual successor to Metroid. It's very by the books, something that Metroid kind of felt groundbreaking doing originally when it came out, and eventually Metroidvanias kind of improved upon. Axiom Verge feels very similar to the original Metroid, and it's just the base level mechanics are sound, they work, you stick to it, you're gonna have fun regardless. The second game improves upon that slightly. It changes a lot of the sci-fi settings into a more darkness environments, more open areas for you to be able to explore, and simply put, is a much more approachable experience, but at the same time with plenty of challenge afoot. And speaking of Metroid, you cannot necessarily make a Metroidvania list without including a Metroid game, and thankfully we have a brand new Metroid game released in the past few years, and that is of course Metroid Dread. This game pretty much takes the roots of Metroid and builds upon it like never before, and it turns it into a Castlevania game. It's simply just one of those games that just took everything that the original games did, built upon it, and then adds so many more quality of life improvements. The boss engagements have been fantastic in this game, plenty of post-downloadable content, extra added difficulties for you to be able to have subsequent runs, for you to have 100% completions, the works. When it comes to talking about one of the best releases on the Nintendo Switch's life history, Metroid Dread is probably gonna definitely be in one of those top 10. Simply put, is one of the most fantastic Metroidvania games ever made, and more importantly, it is a true Metroid experience. Ender Lilies is one of those Metroidvanias that just throughout the years hasn't necessarily received all the love that it could have. I don't necessarily know if it's the visuals, I don't know if it's because it's just created by a development team that just isn't necessarily very popular or like popular in the West, but it's one of the best streamlined Metroidvania experiences you could ever pick up. If anyone's gonna ever ask you what should be your first Metroidvania game, Ender Lilies probably would be my first suggestion, quickly followed by Metroid Dread. The simple reason is that because you have access to save points pretty much right out of the gate. As long as you progress through the game, you should be able to have access to a save point, and that save point should be able to let you backtrack or forward to whichever point you've already visited. Now, other games in this genre have already added those features, but this one was one of the first ones that did it. On top of that, you have quick things like if you discover everything in a specific map in a specific room, you no longer have to be able to go back into that room because it will be color coded as a different thing. So you no longer necessarily need to feel obligated to go back. Combat feels fast, it feels fluid. There's plenty of support ways for you to be able to play, plenty of support abilities for you to be able to attach to your character, which doesn't actually attack, but instead uses spirits to be able to move around the world. It is just such a unique game, even within the Metroidvania sphere, that at the end of the day, I couldn't necessarily leave it off this list. Now, another pair of games that deserve a shout out is Ori and the Blind Forest and Ori and the Will of the Wisp. Now, Ori and the Blind Forest focuses more on platforming than actual direct combat. There is combat, but it's not necessarily the biggest focus on the game. At the very least, most of the time, you're going to be exploring striking environments, beautifully detailed experiences and worlds that just simply put look amazing. But you do keep in mind that it's mostly focused on like for you to be able to traverse the game world as fast as possible. You gain abilities like a jump, a double jump, a super jump, a climb, a dash, and all of them are intertwined together in specific set-piece puzzles, kind of a situation where as long as you progress, you get to explore more of the world and you get to make advances through the more abilities you progress. So there is some backtracking, there's still some Metroidvania aspects to it, and the second game, Will of the Wisp, kind of builds upon that, but it feels like ultimately it falls off a little bit. So most people would probably tell you that Ori and the Blind Forest is probably the better game of the two, but I think that both games certainly merit their own experience, and if of course you're going to be waiting for Silksong for a while, you certainly have enough time to be able to play both. Now I do want to give a quick shout out to 4 other games, quick notable shout outs. Salt and Sanctuary is a more fast-paced melee combat and obviously more frustrating encounter featured game, if you will. Plenty of difficult bosses in this one, plenty of added content as well, so they've kind of like tweaked this game to the point that it's just become kind of like the best version of itself, and it has like 600 or so craftable weapons, so plenty of things here for you to be able to do in the years since it has been released. Of course, the most underknown, underbeknownst, underspoken about indie game of all time has to be Celeste, pretty much the true hidden gem of all gaming. Sarcasm aside, I think Celeste is a fantastic game that pretty much every Metroidvania fan should be able to check out. A lot of people wouldn't necessarily qualify it as that because it's more puzzle platformy type of like solution solving, less enemy focus, more again platforming type of like dashes and jumps and using the environment to your advantage, but of course still a fantastic experience. Another, of course, notable mention is Shovel Knight, and I think the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove collection is available on the Nintendo Switch and presumably other consoles as well. This one, of course, has a little bit more focus on platforming sequences, a little bit less on combat, but of course there's still plenty of combat afoot, plenty of popular characters that have kind of made their wave and weaved their way into like the gaming sphere. Of course, they have become popular throughout the years, and is easily one of the best, easily most recommendable games for you to check out if you're interested in Metroidvanias at all. And my last notable mention has to be, of course, the Mega Man Zero collection. This one is more focused actually on combat, less a little bit on platforming, less a little bit on just traversal, and it's just simply more of a different take on the Mega Man experience. A lot of players probably have known and heard of Mega Man throughout the years, and the Mega Man Zero collection, I think, adds more to it since it puts a different character on the forefront. Doesn't necessarily have to be tied specifically to that. And if you choose to buy this specific release on the Nintendo Switch, I believe there's like 8 to 10 games included, so there's plenty of things here to experience that I highly recommend. So there you have it, about 7 featured games that I think if you're interested in playing Silksong, or you're waiting to play Silksong for whenever 2030 rolls around, you should be able to have plenty of time to be able to check out those games. And 4 notable mentions that, of course, these are classic games people have been known for a long time and certainly are worth checking out in their own right. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up, and as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.